Something is changing in the world. Not with explosions, not with armies marching, but quietly, slowly, behind closed doors. While most people are distracted, a new global order is being shaped. And when it becomes visible, it may already be too late to stop it.
Nothing exploded. No emergency sirens. No breaking news banners screaming across your screen. And that's exactly why almost everyone missed it. Because the most powerful changes in the world rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with chaos. They arrive quietly, almost politely. One day looks exactly like the day before. People go to work, markets open, governments speak confidently. But underneath that normal surface, something shifts. Not visibly, not dramatically, structurally. This is how the modern world really changes. Not through invasions, not through coups, but through decisions made in rooms you will never enter, by people you will never vote for. And those decisions have names that sound harmless, technical, boring. One of those names is downgrade. Now stop for a moment, because when you hear that word, your brain probably shuts off. Downgrade sounds like paperwork, like a spreadsheet adjustment, like something only economists care about. But that's the trick. A downgrade is not about numbers, it's about belief. It's about whether the world still trusts you. And once that trust begins to weaken, even slightly, the entire system reacts. Not emotionally, automatically. Money moves first, then opportunities, then influence. And by the time ordinary people feel it, the decision is already old news. Here's the uncomfortable truth. No country wakes up one morning and suddenly collapses. That's not how power disappears anymore. Power fades. It thins. It leaks out slowly. And downgrades are one of the quietest tools ever invented to make that happen. They don't punish, they reprice. They don't accuse, they reevaluate. And they don't need permission. So when people ask, who controls the New World Order, they usually look in the wrong direction. They look at presidents, at armies, at flags. But real control today doesn't look like dominance, it looks like credibility. And credibility can be removed without firing a single shot. That's why this matters. Not someday, now. Because this story isn't about one country, it's about the system every country is trapped inside. And once you see how that system actually works, you start to understand why power is shifting in ways that feel invisible, yet permanent.
Here's where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because the people who decide a country's fate are not the people you elect. They don't campaign, they don't give speeches, and they don't argue on television. Most of them never speak publicly at all. Instead, they sit behind models, behind risk frameworks, behind probability charts that don't care about pride or history. These are not villains. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't hate countries. They don't love them either. They measure them. Debt, stability, growth, political risk, institutional strength, future uncertainty. And when those indicators shift, the conclusion is automatic. No emotion, no warning, just an adjustment. Now here's where the governments never like to admit. When a downgrade happens, officials usually respond with confidence. They say the fundamentals are strong. They say the economy is resilient. They say the decision is unfair. Sometimes they're even right. But none of that changes the math. Because global money doesn't listen to speeches. It listens to signals. And a downgrade is one of the clearest signals the system has. It tells investors, be careful here. Not run, not panic. Just hesitate. And hesitation is enough. Because when money hesitates, it chooses somewhere else. another market, another country, another promise of stability. And that's when influence quietly begins to move. This is why downgrades are so powerful. They don't create fear, they create doubt. And doubt is far more effective. Fear causes reactions. Doubt causes delays. Projects slow down, costs rise, decisions get postponed, and no one can point to a single moment where it all went wrong. That's the brilliance of the system. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses. It just becomes harder to move forward. And when progress slows long enough, people stop asking why. They start asking how to survive. Money is often described as smart, but that's not exactly true. Money isn't intelligent, it's sensitive. It reacts before people do, before voters, before headlines catch up. That's why the first signs of trouble never look dramatic. There's no crash, no collapse, just small movements that most people ignore. Interest rates tick upward, borrowing becomes slightly more expensive, insurance premiums quietly increase. Nothing alarming on its own, but together they form a pattern. And here's the key thing most people miss. These changes don't happen after trust is lost. They happen while trust is being questioned. Money doesn't wait for certainty. It moves at the first hint of doubt. So when a downgrade lands, the reaction has already begun. Behind the scenes, portfolios adjust, exposure is reduced, risk models tighten. Not because disaster is expected, but because uncertainty has a price, and someone always pays it. Usually, it's not the institutions. They pass the cost down to governments, to businesses, to ordinary people. This is why prices can rise even when nothing seems wrong, why jobs disappear even when companies claim stability, why growth slows even when leaders promise momentum. The system isn't broken, it's responding. And once money starts responding differently, the old assumptions stop working. Plans made under confidence don't survive under caution. That's when something subtle changes in a society. People become more careful, less willing to take risks, less willing to invest in long-term futures. Not because they're pessimistic, but because the environment no longer rewards optimism. This is how power drains. Not through collapse, through adjustment. And adjustments are hard to reverse because they feel reasonable at every step. No one sounds alarmist, no one looks reckless. Everyone is just being careful. This is the part that confuses most people. Because when a country begins to lose influence, life doesn't suddenly fall apart. Cities don't empty, stores don't close overnight. People don't stop laughing or making plans. In fact, everything can look fine. And that's the danger, because humans are very good at adjusting. We normalize slowly changing conditions without realizing it. A price goes up, people complain once, then they adapt. A service gets worse, people notice, then they lower expectations. Opportunities become fewer, but they don't disappear all at once. They thin out. And when something disappears gradually, the mind stops comparing it to the past. It compares it to yesterday. That's how decline hides in plain sight. Leaders still speak confidently. Statistics can still look acceptable. Growth might still exist, just weaker. And because nothing dramatic happens, people assume nothing serious is wrong. But systems don't fail like movies. They erode like coastlines, one small piece at a time. This is why downgrades are so effective. They don't shock populations, they change behavior. Companies delay expansion, young people delay big decisions, governments delay reforms. Everything becomes provisional. And when a society lives too long in provisional mode, long-term vision disappears. People stop asking, where are we going? They start asking, how do we get through this year? That's not collapse, that's contraction. Quiet, orderly, and incredibly hard to reverse. Because by the time people realize something important was lost, it already feels like the new normal. When people talk about power, they usually imagine force, tanks, missiles, troops crossing borders. But that image is outdated. Real power today doesn't need to conquer. It doesn't need to invade. It just needs to be trusted. Because trust decides whose currency is held, whose debt is bought, whose future is financed. This is the foundation of the modern world order. Not ideology, not alliances, credibility. And credibility is fragile. It takes decades to build and moments to question. That's why downgrades matter so much. They don't challenge sovereignty, they challenge reliability. And in a system built on promises, reliability is everything. This is where the idea of a new world order becomes real, not as a conspiracy, but as a structure. A structure where influence flows towards stability and away from uncertainty. No secret meetings, no single controller, just a global system constantly recalculating risk. And every recalculation reshapes the map. Some countries find themselves paying more for the same access they once had. Others suddenly gain influence without firing a shot, not because they're stronger militarily, but because they feel safer financially. This is how leadership changes hands quietly, not announced, not celebrated, just reflected in where money chooses to stay. Most people spend their time asking the wrong question. They ask whether a country is rising or falling, whether it's winning or losing. But those questions come too late. By the time a rise or fall is obvious, the decision has already been made. The real question is simpler and far more uncomfortable. Is the world still willing to trust you? Because once that answer starts to change, everything else follows. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. This is why the New World Order doesn't arrive with chaos. It arrives with adjustments, with re-ratings, with revisions, with quiet shifts and confidence. And those shifts don't care about speeches or history or how powerful a country believes it is. They only care about what comes next. That's the part most people never hear. The future is priced in, long before it arrives. So when you see higher costs, slower growth, and shrinking influence, don't ask what suddenly went wrong. Ask what quietly changed years ago. Because power today isn't taken, it's reallocated. And once reallocated, it rarely comes back the same way. That's not pessimism. That's how the system works. The only real choice any country has is whether it recognizes that shift early or explains it away until it feels permanent.